close that down. Otherwise, it'll just be really annoying by the side of the screen. Okay, fantastic. Yeah, so there's just this really strong parallels, and in particular, perhaps the strongest parallel is I've now just got to the Scooby-Doo chapter, where you're talking about who's behind it all and who are the bogeymen of climate change, and it's exactly the same tactics. It's the corporations, it's the dubious scientists, and a favourite anecdote I used to trot out at occupational health conferences was Hitler refused to have asbestos used on Nazi submarines because of British research in South African asbestos mines in the 1920s, which you can imagine goes down very well.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing, isn't it, how far back it goes and how similar it is throughout the last whatever 100 years. And same things again and again.
Yeah, it's exactly the same tactics. It's confusing the issue, introducing doubt. But what they've also been really skillful at doing, corporations in the past and recently as well, is using comedy to bring people in to kind of to bring in younger generation. I don't know if you're probably just about one generation below me, maybe.
Yeah, probably.
If you remember the Hamlet advert.
Oh, I do remember it. I do remember it. Yeah.
Happy
Just
to
about.
cigar called Hamlet.
And
so there's a real. So I'm just. Well, I suppose the first thing to raise with you is, do you think? I think it's an obvious answer. You're already kind of doing this to a certain extent in your book, but is comedy a useful vehicle to counter those messages? Do you think is that a useful way to go down?
Yeah, it is. It's not. Yeah, it's a useful way to counter some messages. It's a useful way to not, because it's the same when it's used by other people to sort of, you're either undercutting someone else's message, or you're making yourself seem quite approachable and like and a bit more on the side of whoever it is that you're trying to talk to. And I think so it can be used, but it can be used in either way. I think a lot of the time we feel like we need to always be very serious and be the voice of reason or whatever in science, and be the way, but I actually think it's not to say you just want to make everything funny the entire time, but there's this appropriate times where it is very useful in a number of different ways. I've definitely found that it's been useful just from a communications perspective to slightly be self-deprecating and make yourself just seem much more approachable, so that people will actually come and feel like they can talk to you about stuff that they otherwise wouldn't do. That you seem less like you're up on a pedestal, or that you're talking down to people. It's much more you sort of use comedy to bring yourself, not saying you are above everybody, but the way you talk is at the same sort of level as the general public or whatever. So comedy can be really a good way of doing that. It also depends on whether you're using it to sort of punch at specific people, or you're just being kind of silly. You're using comedy as a way to sort of make it fun. There's different ways of kind of using comedy to try to get messages across. And so it sort of depends on the exact situation, but I found it's a very useful tool for that. It's also a very useful tool to just get people to pay attention for an hour. Or whatever it is.
Yeah, and that's
what I mean?
Isn't it?
If you put on a lecture, if you've got something that you want to convey information, say, to a local community, right, and you organize a community event that you're going to try and give them information about what they need to do, say it is whatever it is, a pandemic, something else. But if you were able to actually just entertain them for an hour, if you're able to keep their attention and make them feel like you're not telling them stuff that they're being judged, that they're being banned, whatever it is, if you can just engage people in a way that they feel like they're not being lectured at, and that they're being they're sort of enjoying themselves, or that they find something interesting, or that they're gonna they know that, like, oh, I'm getting this bit of information, but there's going to be a joke after it, then I'm able to sort of like they don't feel like they're been over bombarded with too much information or too much fear or whatever.
Yeah, absolutely. And you definitely the self-deprecating humor, that's standard stand-up fare, isn't it? Sort of,
yeah.
I saw a number of the parallels with stand-up kind of sets, the kind of running narrative through it, and the kind of the beginning and end with each chapter. So in terms of the book, did you set about writing the chapters as stand-up sets? Did they emerge out of that, or?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, some of them kind of emerged out of little routines that I had, and I sort of then built them up around that. And obviously the book's a bit different in the sense of the size of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, kind of that's a good way of looking at it. It's like little bits that I would do. The book is kind of like a big stand-up set, really. Say I was doing 20 minutes, and then each of the chapters would be like the little routines that I would tend to, so if I did have a stand-up set, that might be the structure of it. It's the same structure as the book, but you would have, a couple of jokes from each chapter peppered throughout the set rather than kind of as much information. So it's more just the level of detail there that you're going into.
Yeah. With the book.
But you're trying to make it sort of as you say, personal as well is really important to do, because the reason that people tend to see comedians, and it's not the case for necessarily every comedian, obviously there's lots of different types of comedy, but most of people's kind of favorite comedians are, you kind of know what that person's take's going to be on something, or you're interested in seeing them and what their take on what's happening in their life. So they'll either talk about personal stuff that they're going through or whatever it is, or they'll talk about a subject but their views on that, and it's it's the exact same thing that I'm trying to do, and that I think we want to do, which is to personalize it so that you're talking about what it's like to, say, work in a specific area of science, what your life experiences are, what your experiences are of certain elements, or subjects that you're talking about. And where you can't necessarily talk about yourself, you might talk about other people as well. But the whole point of it, I guess, is trying to have stories about people, because people are interested in other people first and foremost. And also trying to talk a bit about, if you're not necessarily talking about stories, you might be talking about things that people do. So often I find it, and I think you might want to talk about this a bit more or whatever, it's easy to start with a lot of the individual action stuff on climate change, and some of the stuff that's a bit more, it works from a day-to-day perspective. People have more of a connection with it on a day-to-day perspective within their own lives. So if you talk about driving, or you talk about food, something like that, people are instantly like, right, well, I drive, or I've got a car, or I've got energy bills, or I've got whatever. So if you start with the stuff that's a bit more common to people's lives, that's the kind of way I often start, as a way in to talking about stuff, and then later on I can do the more kind of complicated, like systemic change, the more kind of often the more important stuff, but it's often the harder stuff to talk about. And if you come straight off the bat with that, I'm not saying it's not doable, it probably is. I just find it depends how many people you want to take along with you, sort of thing. It's maybe a bit of try and ease people into it a little bit more.
No, that's exactly what I've definitely used that in stand-up. So around the soft drinks tax and a gig in Glasgow, I used the ginger tax, so everything's just a bottle of ginger. And then going to see the director's call with Danny Alexander's office was particularly tense. Remember the guy that was in?
Oh yeah.
And politically incorrect taxes, but just things that people can relate to on a personal level. Is really your Terry's chocolate oranges and your big chips, the big fat.
Exactly.
Chip. So
every
west of Scotland.
the chip stuff is a bit that I do in my stand-up. That's just quite an easy one to get, because most people eat chips. Most people enjoy a discussion about the size of chips, and it's just one of those kind of things that we've all been through. So it's like, how do you find those little connections that are relevant to things that you've got a shared experience with other people or whatever that are kind of funny in of themselves.
Yeah. Absolutely. And is it easy to make the jump between that and, obviously with climate change, there's the large societal issues, and with public health, it's tackling corporations, it's tackling obesity, it's it's complex, wicked problems, isn't it? It's making that link.
100%. And that's the hard bit to do. That's the real tricky aspect. Is how do you come at those messages or those topics that are a bit bigger, and can you keep bringing it back somehow to something that's at a lower kind of personal level? Is there a way of talking about that? Is there a way of, giving metaphors or something like that, or other ways of kind of you know what I mean? Like this, and I'm trying to think of good examples, but it's it's talking about companies behaving the same way that maybe you would behave in a certain situation or something like that, or companies personifying companies a little bit into this. They're like this kind of guy that you might meet or whatever. It's just finding ways of talking about it and giving those messages and acknowledging that they can be a bit more complicated, but then finding ways of bringing them back down and then going back to exploring the kind of higher level stuff. That's the trickiest part, in my opinion. So it's the most interesting stuff, but it's the hardest bit to get right. What you're saying, like the Scooby-Doo stuff, sort of talking about how do you find a way of talking about that without just being like ranting about how much of an arsehole, how horrible these companies are or whatever, or how difficult it is to change embedded structures in society or ways of thinking. And that's the real tough stuff. And I'm trying to start writing a new show just now, and starting with some of that stuff already, just as a way of like, how am I going to approach this?
Yeah. I think that the classics for me are the John Burton, John Fortune debates, when they used to be interview a banker and he would just come out with really unspeakably immoral things, and it'd be actually, oh yeah, it's perfectly acceptable.
That's funny.
But I'm just wondering, in terms of different forms of comedy, obviously you've done the long form. I suppose the book would be called kind of long form comedy, but it's stand up routines. Is there particular advantages to particular types of comedy and for certain messages, or?
That's a good question. No, I don't think there's necessarily like you may be right. There's probably some ways of you need a bit longer to talk about the more systemic stuff, so slightly more long form, or anything helps with that, because
as opposed to individual stuff.
Whereas the individual stuff's easier to do in kind of whatever form you want. But I mean, because I've cut, it's more to do with what your comfort zone is. So I've done so much live stuff that I feel quite comfortable doing the live shows or whatever. And I kind of know how to work that. Whereas some of the shorter stuff, like one of the things I'm trying to do now is probably in the next year or so, is move much more into kind of shorter stuff for online content. And it's not stuff that I've done loads of in the past, but I'm going to have to work out how to do it and how to kind of, because the industry's kind of changed a bit as well. It's just a good way of kind of keeping an audience and reaching lots of people very quickly as well. But that sort of thing where it's like, how do you make something that's a minute? You know what I mean? How do you get really good at making that sort of short form stuff, and how much can you get in? How much information can you get into a really short thing versus it's the difference between doing a sketch in a minute versus whatever my book's about 9 hours long. You can take a good 20 minutes to explore a subject if you really want to there in a lot of depth that you can't if you're trying to reach a bigger market very, very quickly. Yeah, and then a lot of the other stuff that I've been thinking about a lot recently is just to do with audience. You know what I mean? It's to do with who are you trying to reach, or how do you try and reach certain groups of people. So, you know, obviously it's great if you know you're doing comedy, you know, stand up in a comedy club. You tend to have quite a mixed audience of people coming to that.
Yeah.
You know. But, you know, sometimes I'll be doing stuff where it's a theatre show.
Right.
And so I, you know, they're probably a bit more self-selecting about who's deciding to come to watch a show if they know it's about climate change, for instance. Like, who's deciding to come to that? Versus even with the book, one of the things that I struggled a bit with was that a lot of the publishers would put it in like the environment section of a bookshop, which
of course
the book wasn't really intended for people that would normally buy a book about
the
environment. You know what I mean? It's more intended for a more general audience.
Yeah.
So, but I'm not in control of that either. So I'm almost not in control of that audience as well. So you're not really in control of who, you know, consumes the stuff that you make. And also I'm not entirely sure, you know, is there different ways of doing it? So should I be writing books for, you know, a book for a specific audience? Should it be a book for like a sports, you know, should I be doing a comedy sports climate change book? Was one of the things that I've been trying to pitch recently. Versus, you know, because you have a specific kind of, that is a genre of whatever book that you might buy, or is there a specific kind of comedy, you know, market that you're trying to hit? Can you be a bit more specific about the audiences, I guess, is what I'm kind of coming to, because it's good to make general stuff, but it's also good to be a bit more, you know, you can get away with then talking about, like, sometimes I'll be asked to do talks to very specific groups of people. You know, I was asked to do a talk to like a yachting association recently.
Right.
Go, right, cool. Okay. What, you know, they obviously have a, you know, how can I make this a bit more about what they are already interested in, or, you know, tech companies. I've been asked to do some stuff for like big tech companies. Right. So you go and speak to like lots of people from computing kind of backgrounds and stuff. And it's like, how you're trying to work out how to make stuff relevant to those people so that it'll you know, stick with them, or it'll you know, speak to them.
Absolutely.
And that's the tricky thing as well.
So did you do a sea shanty for the yachting content? Get it on YouTube.
Yeah, I should definitely move into some shanties going forward.
Excellent. Yeah. No. Yeah, and that's I've done a few specialist charity gigs, but they've never really been related to. They've done the meningitis ball.
Right.
About
nice.
10 years ago.
I've got a bit that I'm talking about at the moment, just about how what was it? Somebody suggested that because at COP28, so the one last year in Dubai, it was the first time that fossil fuels were mentioned within the text.
Right.
You know, really? how we need to phase out fossil fuels, and it's, you know, it's taken us 28 conferences for them to eventually just even name. So someone said it's like, you know, it's like having 28 malaria conferences and only taking 28 years to mention mosquitoes. Yes. And then, which is good. And then I was saying, well, ironically, there's actually going to be a lot more malaria conferences because of climate change.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good, yeah.
So, you know, anyway, but health is another one. Like I'm already, you know, sort of thinking about how, you know, you could potentially narrow it down so that you're doing, you know, just specific stuff about health, climate change and health related elements, because it's you know, it's a thing that people kind of understand, and it's a more specific audience as well, and everybody has, you know, health, and there's a lot of stuff there already. So that might be another thing that I'm thinking of, you know, in the next few years, trying to do kind of.
No, there's very close parallels there. But you think of the Coca-Cola, soft drinks industry, the amount of water they use.
Mm-hmm.
They set up massive big desalination plants in parts of India. It's not to provide fresh water to the local population. It's to millions of tons of fresh water needed to make Coke and give them all diabetes. It's just
yeah, yes, there's definitely a lot there, and that crossover of climate and health is fascinating to me. So I've spent a few years as one of the authors on. There's a report that comes out in the Lancet every year.
Oh, I've seen that. Yeah, Lancet Climate Change.
Yeah. So I was on that for 4 years there.
Right. Excellent.
So it's something that I'm already sort of in. It's just the connection's really interesting to me.
Yeah,
as a way to talk about it.
Yeah, and is it about? I suppose comedy itself is about making links that are on the surface already.
Yeah.
That's a comedy brain is supposedly wired, and I see myself. I suppose I do that in a way as well. Just finding links between.
Yeah.
Is it left side of brain or right side of brain?
I can never remember.
Makes those connections. So that's just a way of increasing people's understanding and finding comedy value and making connections.
You're right. It's just a lot about those, essentially taking two things that maybe you don't make connections of, and then thinking about them a lot and trying to smash them together and work out where's their overlap, how can you think about these two things so that one fits into the other or whatever. And it's always fun. I love the actual. Barely have any time for it is the problem, but the actual writing process, the sitting down and trying to think of stuff with other people as well is just a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I'm particularly proud of a sketch we wrote for April Fool's Day in Glasgow, a Glasgow radio station, around this using the sound effect of breaking glass. So a deluded group of Glasgow environmentalists that believe greenhouse gases come from greenhouses.
So I saw the greenhouse busters that I liked.
So So if you're ever looking for a collaborator on sketches, I mean, I suppose it brings us to sketch comedy as well. Is sketch comedy just too silly to address climate change, or
no, not at all. Not at all. Far from it. I think it's great, and it's something that I'm trying to do more of as well when I get a bit more time. I've kind of been writing a few sketches recently and trying to find some time to write more, and then it's just what you do with them, whether it's going to be stuff that you film or stuff that you record or where it's sort of finding the right place for it. I've done some live stuff as well, sketches as well. I've tried to do that. I had an idea that I wanted to do last year, and I don't know if it's going to happen or not. I wanted to do a sketch show, take it to the Fringe. It would be just like a handful of people doing sketches, not about climate change for the first kind of 10 minutes, but then the sketch show gets interrupted by some climate protesters who glue themselves to the stage, and then you've got the rest of the sketch show is like them interacting with the protesters, and sort of trying to go on with the show, but not really being able to do it and stuff, and just so it become more like a comedy play sort of thing, where the audience doesn't quite know whether or not it's real or not.
Actually, just when we were in London there, I went to a show called The Play Where Everything Went Wrong. It was really funny, and they do a bit of that. There's a dog being lost at the start. They come down. So
it's very good. I've not seen it for a while. I mean, sorry, I saw it a long time ago. It's great.
It's hilarious.
Yeah, sort of similar to that, but I guess about climate change a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So in terms of you're going to develop your outputs into social media and things, and I suppose it's just to what extent also you might use shock value as well with climate change, or do you have to be careful with that in terms of?
It is tricky. The balance is really tricky there, and I don't tend to use it so often. Depends what the shock is. I've got a few the odd dirty joke in my set that I think people enjoy because they don't really expect it or see it coming, because it's delivered by an academic, but also it's not something you would really associate with climate change. But it's not something I do a lot of. And I think other people do or can kind of take that approach if that's the style that you kind of come at things with. And I think that's perfectly fine. But it's also a tricky balance, especially with climate change, because, you know, you need comedy, you know, it has that distinction between sort of punching up or punching down. Are you punching up at people? Is the, you know, the people who have the power? Is the joke? Are they the butt of the joke, or is it someone, you know, that's been impacted by climate change? It's probably not going to be quite as funny if it's someone, you know, who's already, you know, struggling or something like that. So you've got to be very careful with the way that you
direct your target.
Exactly. And shock can work as well. If that's what you're good at, essentially. I don't think anything's off limits. It just depends what your skill set is a little bit.
But I hadn't appreciated fully the extent to which inequalities is such a major issue. And you cover that. I'm aware you're probably a very busy man, so I'll not detain you much longer. But the other aspect I wanted to cover was you talked about being an academic and academic writing. Do you think there are aspects of writing for academic publications that help with the comedy process, and that you're and the complete opposites? But is that in any way mutually?
No, I think comedy helps academic writing. I don't think academic writing helps comedy at all.
Right. Okay. Because it's about taking your personality. It's the opposite, isn't it? It's extracting your.
I think what could you learn from, because you know, you learn to edit stuff, you learn to make very clear your setups and the points that you're making from comedy, and you learn to structure stuff very well, and you learn to personalize it and stuff. With academia, it's often the opposite way. You're trying to not make it very personal, and you're often explaining things in far too much language, or, you know, it's good to be able to reference stuff. It's good. The research part of it is what is actually quite the skill set that I've got from academia that I can apply to comedy is actually being able to research stuff well and understand subject, you know, to be able to basically take from a few places and put it together and sort of understand a topic. So it's not like I've not learned anything, but it's probably not so applicable to the sort of actual writing of the jokes or anything like that, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I suppose the obvious overlap is lecturing. I think you've alluded to already.
Which is weird. So I've only just started lecturing kind of I've been in academia for about 16 years, but I've done, you know, I normally would do 1 or 2 lectures a year, but I've just now moved to a teaching, to be honest, I've just moved to a teaching position to allow me more flexibility to do more comedy, because I see them more, as you say, you know, I see them more as like the same sort of skill set, which they are. You're right. The actual teaching part of it is really similar, in the sense that you're taking complex information and you're trying to make it accessible, and you're trying to get people enthusiastic about it, and you're trying to get students to, you know, think about it and to be, you know, to bring their own logic to it or their own viewpoints to it, whatever. So from a teaching perspective, you're right, 100%. There's a great crossover there between the two things.
Yeah, I think I'll definitely need to get back into the academy. I do some teaching, but nowhere near as much as I used to.
And I love it. I really enjoy it, but I struggled with the doing research, because that was mostly what I did on top of the comedy writing was really hard, because they both require so much kind of your focus and nothing else. And it was really hard sort of chopping between those two things.
Yeah, definitely. It's all consuming, isn't it? Research in terms of
exactly.
If you leave the office before 9 o'clock, you're a waster.
I know.
So have you got anything on the cards then? Shows coming up then?
So I've got a couple of shows left this year. One in London, and a couple. I'm hosting an award ceremony in December.
Okay.
Dublin in December. Something this week. I've got a show on Friday in Corsham, an art centre in Corsham. And then next year, a few things. I'm up in Newcastle. I'm in Norwich, and then.
When are you in Newcastle? I'll look up your
website. Yeah, my website. The problem is my website's terrible because I've had no time to update it. I need to properly update it. I mean, do have a look. I will.
Twitter
yeah, I think it's the end of February. Maybe I'm going to say the 21st or the 25th or something like that. February. Maybe 25th. I think it is 25th of February. I'm in Newcastle, and then I'll be up in Scotland probably a little bit next year, and then the plans to come to the Edinburgh Fringe in August again next year and be there for the month.
Yeah. I definitely like to do something there. Whether it's
you should, yeah, absolutely. You should. You just need a bit of time, bit of time, and it depends what you want to do. What the aim of it is, or whatever you. But if you just want to do it for the sake of enjoying it, you could probably do a kind of free Fringe show or something like that, and without massive costs, and then. And try and do just a short run. I ended up doing. So I've done the Fringe. God, 13 years, 14 years, something like that. And it kind of varied from year to year what I was doing. But I've taken a kind of break a bit the last few years, so I did a new show every year for 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, and then I wrote the book 2020. So then COVID happened, wrote the book in 2020, 2021, and then I did a 12 days at the Fringe in 2022 of the book, like a kind of like a version of the book on stage. But then I've not been back for the last 2 years properly, so I took 2023 off, and then in 2024 I did last year, August there, I did a week where I was just testing out new material. Did it really cheap and just kind of tried some stuff with the plan to come back in 2025.
Brilliant.
But yeah, the Fringe is great, and there's Glasgow Comedy Festival. There's other places you can go.
That's right. Yeah.
If you've got an idea, it kind of depends what you want to do. But given that you've got that specific area, you might want to just thinking about putting a show, like an hour show together to do at one of the comedy festivals at some point.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's definitely on the cards.
Good.
And if my assignment bombs, I'll come and look you up. And
aye, absolutely.
Fantastic.
I'm sure it'll be great, and so and the course has been a lot of fun.
Yeah, no, it's really good. It's been a real eye-opener. And the real eye-opener for me was particularly around physical comedy, because I've always thought in terms of kind of wordplay and from the stand-up perspective. But when you're thinking of comedy, you think all the classic, all the classic
the old stuff
scenes that people mention, that Del Boy falling through the bar, it's all physical comedy, and so that's been a real revelation. So what I've been, you write various bits and pieces, and the sitcom I've been writing is heavily based on a lot of physical comedy.
Stuff. That's great.
So it's been really good. And the next module is you work up something significant to pitch to industry, a sitcom pilot. And as I say, I think I've never asked them for their statistics of success rates, but there's some really, really gifted people on it. So it's a good active peer interaction.
Well, that's the best. That's the way to do it. That's the way you get good as well, and you get to know people and stuff. So that's fantastic.
Yeah. So it's been really useful from that point of view. But
lovely.
So thanks very much, Matt. It's been really, really valuable and inspiring, as I knew it would be. So
not at all.
I'll keep my eye on your appearances.
No, keep in touch. Let me know when you're doing some stuff as well, or whatever, or keep in touch and send some stuff over at some point.
Will do.
I'll hopefully see you again over the next year or so.
That'd be brilliant. Yeah.
And
fantastic.
Yeah, if you think anything that would be good to work on together at some point, let me know.
Yeah, I think there's some potential crossovers there.
Definitely.
Fantastic. Really appreciate it. Thanks very much.
No worries.
All the
best.
Lovely
to chat. Yeah, you too.
Likewise. Cheers now. Take care. Bye. Bye.